So there's a coup in British politics right now. The Labour Party is itself imploding from within as it's trying to oust Starmer and replace him with Andy Burnham instead. And every week there are new betrayals within the Labour Party, with another Starmer ally, and there's private emails leaked to the press and a scandal erupts, followed by damage to Starmer's brand. But more important, I think, than the coup itself is that everything is going to get worse, and actually this coup is not going to be able to stop that. And in this video, I'm going to do my best to explain exactly what's going on, what I think is going to happen next with regards to this coup, and why. And also, this is a brand new YouTube channel. If you want more content like this, comment, tell me that so I know, so I can keep making content. If you really want to help me succeed and get this channel to grow, well then subscribe and share this video with someone else to help us grow and to reach more people. Now, I am firmly of the belief that this coup is going to fail before it really starts. And that's because the first big problem that's going to kill this coup is that actually for a new Labour leader and a new Prime Minister, we need someone who's already an MP. And there are just no real candidates who could actually succeed as Prime Minister right now who are Labour MPs. There's a massive, laughable and ludicrous talent shortage within the Labour Party right now. David Lammy is Foreign Secretary. Rachel Reeves is Chancellor. These are two of the most powerful people in the country who are complete failures in everything throughout their lives, except for being able to whine and get on the BBC News whilst they were in opposition. Both of them are just severely incompetent in every way, and that's incredibly representative of the lack of talent in the Labour Party. So the only legitimate candidate for a popular Prime Minister in the Labour Party right now is Andy Burnham. He used to be an MP before, now he's been the Mayor of Manchester for the best part of a decade, and actually he's a relatively competent person. He's a decent speaker, he's fairly charismatic, and he doesn't have a history of complete failure unlike the rest, and most importantly of all, he actually answers questions in interviews, and he's actually relatively likeable. The big problem with Andy Burnham is that he needs to be an MP to have this actual coup against Starmer take fruit, and that's much more easier said than done. Now, firstly, no coup is really going to happen before the members and the orchestrators of that coup are ready to step up, which means that Burnham needs to actively already be a sitting MP when the coup actually takes place. Now, the next general election is still years ago, so Burnham would need to compete in a by-election first. That's a problem because he's already the Mayor of Manchester and genuinely seems to really love his job, and to have said that it's his dream job, and I actually believe him. I think he loves what he's currently doing. He'd have to give that up for a chance at a coup against Starmer that isn't guaranteed at all. So it requires a big risk for Burnham to even get started. Now, the second problem here is that there currently isn't even an election, a by-election coming up at all that he could reasonably compete at. And Burnham can't go out and force someone in Manchester, his sort of stronghold, to give up their seat to cause a by-election because he's not actually in charge of the Labour Party yet. And Starmer's no doubt going to work very hard to ensure that no one in Manchester does give up their seat because he knows that this coup is going on as well. And the third problem behind this is that Burnham doesn't get to just choose to be a candidate MP for Labour if there is a by-election, right? Let's say that he does give his job up as mayor and a Labour MP in Manchester does stand down and trigger a by-election. Andy Burnham then has to be shortlisted by the Labour Party as their candidate. And in particular, he is to be shortlisted by the National Executive Committee, of which Starmer entirely controls. So it would be obviously politically damaging for Starmer to block Andy Burnham at that point and to stop him even trying to run as an MP, but the alternative to that political damage is just letting him mount his coup. So there's a decent chance that Starmer would just block this all before it even really started, and after Burnham has already given up his mayoral seat. And then we have the fourth problem, which is that Burnham and Labour then have to win that election. Now, for the Mayor of Manchester, in a Manchester constituency, that really wouldn't be hard in normal circumstances for a very popular Labour MP to win. But these are not normal circumstances. And Reform would throw absolutely everything they have into winning that by-election, and the damage that Reform would do to Labour by keeping Starmer in power would be huge, and they'd get huge media attention and favour from the campaign if they won a by-election, so it would boost their polling nationwide as well. So you can best believe that Reform would genuinely spend millions of pounds on that election. The social media would be ridiculously filled with basic Reform content far and wide just to make sure they have the highest possible chance of winning. So reform would clearly fight any by-election where Burnham would seek to get in, but would they actually be able to beat Labour in Manchester? Well, what's been tipped as the most likely place for this to happen in the past is Gorton and Denton, which is a Greater Manchester constituency. Now, basically, the MP who runs there was sacked from his ministerial position and suspended by the Labour Party, and there were rumours that he might stand down and trigger a by-election. That man, the MP who's now been sacked, has come out and said no, he's not going to step down, he's going to hold on to his seat as an independent, so it really isn't clear that much at the moment. But even if he did stand down, and even if Burnham was brave enough to give up his position as Mayor of Manchester and then managed to get nominated as the Labour candidate to go and fight for this position, well, there's no guarantee that he's going to win either. Now, Electoral Calculus is this great website here where they collate all recent polls and they put in their prediction for general elections and for by-elections and all sorts of things like that. Now, a week ago, they put the chance of Reform winning the Gorton and Denton seat at 73%. New polls have come out and they've changed that to a 48% chance of Reform winning and a 50% chance of Labour winning, with a 2% chance of the Greens being chucked in there as well. So an incredibly close margin, and not something at all that is going to be easy for Burnham to win. Now, in that article, they're basically explaining how they think that Burnham could win and beat Reform. Basically, by running not as a Labour MP, but just as Andy Burnham. And there is some early polling out there that suggests Burnham would get about 34% of the vote, or 4% of the vote higher than Reform's 32% if he were to run on a Burnham campaign and not a Labour MP campaign. But that's still a very close margin and could easily lead to Reform winning that by-election. So again, even with those sort of perfect methodical campaigns and strategies planned out by Andy Burnham, it's incredibly unlikely he's going to abandon his dream job of Mayor of Manchester for maybe a 50-50 chance of just becoming an MP again, excluding all of the coup that needs to go on for him to become Prime Minister, because then once Burnham is an MP, right, assuming that all goes well, he still has to actually launch the coup. And with 20% of Labour MPs needed to basically give in their notice and say, Starmer, we don't want you anymore, that's 80 MPs he would need to challenge Starmer as Labour leader. Then all the Labour members get to vote on the new leader, and then that one there is legally binding. If that happened, though, it's almost certain Starmer would lose and be ousted as Prime Minister. But this is an incredibly difficult thing to do, and there's no certainty behind it at all. So it's almost certain, in fact, that this coup is going to fail, but there certainly is a coup going on right now. What though if it actually succeeded, right? Let's say that Burnham succeeds all the way through. 6 months from now, a year from now, he's now Prime Minister and Starmer is gone. Well, his thoughts and philosophy can basically be summarised to something called Manchesterism. And it's what Burnham's pushing for the current government to move in the direction of. And it basically means ignore the financial markets, nationalise a bunch of sectors, raise taxes massively, and put into place proportional representation for the entire country. So let's take a look at each of those and run through them point by point. Ignore the financial markets. What do I mean by that? Well, recently Burnham came out and said, we've got to get beyond this thing of being in hock to the bond markets. And he said that he wants to massively raise taxes and borrowing to the point where he has to borrow an extra £40 billion a year. Now, being in hock to the bond markets basically means you have to do what the bond market says or tells you because you owe them too much money. And he's basically saying, we should just ignore the bond markets, ignore bond yields. We can borrow and spend as much as we want as a government. Investors don't matter. The problem is that investors do matter and that spending has to be paid for by someone. And when you're borrowing to spend, you borrow that money from investors. So without investor confidence, there is literally no money to borrow. Bond yields spike, interest payments skyrocket, and the government and the country goes bankrupt. So in short, getting beyond this thing of being in hock to the bond markets, total disaster, utter idiocy, really, really horrible idea. We best pray that this doesn't come to fruition. Next, we have Burnham's plans to nationalise a bunch of sectors within the UK. Now, this isn't an awful idea, don't get me wrong, right? Trains and railways, for instance, are awful in the UK. Personally, I would much prefer to see us move towards a Japanese-style capital market for our railways, but a straight-out nationalised rail industry would probably be better than what we have right now, which is just lots of little state-approved monopolies with no real competition. The problem with this is that it's incredibly expensive to nationalise industries like railways and water and electricity, and that money is going to come from borrowing. And we already know that Andy Burnham has explained that he has no desire to pander to investors and doesn't care what bond yields are. So again, who is going to give him all this cash to do this? Well, it will be some investors, but they will demand ridiculous interest rates on those bonds that they buy from the government, 10%, 20%, 30%, and suddenly the country goes bankrupt. So then we have Burnham's third point of order of what he wants to change about the Labour government and the country. He wants to raise taxes massively. He said he wants to redo council tax altogether and raise them across the board for expensive properties. Actually, I kind of agree that council tax needs reform. It's stupid and it's regressive and it sucks. But when the economy is shrinking, raising taxes, even through reform, is going to take money out of people's pockets, cause the economy to fall further, which is obviously bad. Even if you're left wing, you should be able to understand that. Burnham also said he wants to raise the top rate of income tax to 50%, plus all the other taxes on top like VAT, national insurance, council tax and road tax. That would basically mean the wealthiest in Britain would be looking at paying something like 75 to 80% of their income in tax. That's enough to make patriots like me, who genuinely love the country, just walk away and leave and stop paying anything in tax. Again, it's a shame that I even have to say this, but the Laffer curve is real and we are already past the hump on it, as evidenced by the fiasco with Labour trying to raise capital gains tax over the last year, only to see capital gains tax receipts actually fall on higher tax rates. So with all these tax raises that Burnham wants, he thinks, his own numbers think he'll still need to raise an extra 40 billion a year on top of the 40 billion a year we're already borrowing. So he wants to double government borrowing on top of the massive tax raises he's planning as well. And then finally, his final, grand cherry on top, whatever, is proportional representation, which is a typical point for leftists, right? This idea that more representation with democracy is better, that more devolution and more local governments and more representation is always better. But the UK system of governance is sort of in this position of in between proportional representation like you get in Europe and then a two-party system like you get in the US. And I actually think we have a damn good system. Proportional representation always leads to fractured governments, to countries which can't do anything because no one ever gets 51% of the vote. And then the US, their two-party system, right? It means that it's impossible to change the political elite because no matter what, it's always going to be Republicans or Democrats, and actually they're 95% the same, which means democracy isn't really active at all, and you only get to vote for very small differences and changes in the government. But the UK gets the advantage of strong governments with majorities, right? Coalitions are actually really rare, minority governments are actually really rare for us, while still allowing upstart parties like UKIP or the Brexit Party or Reform to have an influence on national elections, to have the people's will be known. When the two parties, Labour and Tories, when they ignore the people's will and their votes for too long, there's finally enough outrage and dissent within the voting populace for a third party to destroy one of the old parties, which right now is the Tories, being destroyed by Reform, to provide real representation to politics again. And again, this happened about 100 years ago, where Labour destroyed the Liberal Party and took control of the left. This is, in my opinion, about as close to an ideal political system as we can get. And so Burnham's desire for proportional representation would lead to weaker British governments that just can't get anything done and can't govern, and even more managed decline. So let's be clear, I do not think that a coup is going to be successful and happen, but if it is, I wholeheartedly believe that actually Burnham would be much, much worse for the country than the dire job Starmer's already putting up. But let's think about this from Labour's point of view, right? Let's imagine that we're all leftists and we don't care about the state of the country and whether or not we actually get richer and have a successful government. Let's look at whether Labour as a party is stronger from this coup. Labour is going to lose control in Wales. They are going to lose more councillors during council elections, and they're going to have no ability to fix the problems that the electorate actually want fixed. Does Labour, led by Andy Burnham, have the ability to fix things? Well, he'll have higher approval ratings across the country at first than Starmer. That's not difficult. But he will continue to fall behind on the economy. The economy will continue to shrink. His massive spending plans will cause inflation. The debt burden will get worse and immigration will not be tackled. So Burnham is just a much more charismatic and electable Starmer, but he'll suffer from all the exact same problems that Starmer's really being destroyed by. In terms of saving Labour right now, this coup won't save Labour from anything. It will help a little bit, but it won't solve any of the fundamental problems. Burnham's not super charismatic, right? He's 10 times better than Starmer. Yes, he speaks upfront and honest, which is always very appealing to voters these days, but he's still just a bit of a politician. And he's still sort of hamstrung by his own left-wing politics. And the key problem of this country is getting worse and Labour are the problem is going to be true whether Andy Burnham's in control or Starmer. And that's the view of 70% of the country right now. Burnham isn't going to be able to fix that. Maybe he gets a honeymoon period of about a year where people don't realise that he can't fix anything yet and he doesn't live up to his promises. But that time will still come when the honeymoon period ends. Mass immigration remains a problem. Inflation remains a problem. The ECHR remains a problem. The stagnant economy remains a problem. The national debt crisis is still a crisis. None of that will be fixed with his ideas. British people will continue to get poorer and they will turn on Burnham just as they did Starmer. Now, I do want to be clear. I actually don't hate Burnham, which is rare for a famous left-wing politician for me, right? Starmer, I genuinely believe, is a bad person, right? I firmly believe he does not care about the UK, Britain, or its citizens. He doesn't care about our place in the world. He doesn't care about the future we leave for our children. He follows traditional left-wing ideas of prioritizing those far away rather than those close. And he actually cares more about non-British citizens than British citizens. He's happy to steal money off British people in the form of taxes and to waste that money on useless green initiatives or foreign aid or just literally giving free money and free stuff to illegal immigrants in this country, right? I think this, right? I think that Starmer's like this because it's how he's behaved his entire life, right? He was interested in communism as a young adult. He went to a Czech communist work camp for a holiday well before the Cold War ended, right? He had communist intelligence agencies with a profile on him as someone they thought that he would work with. He's a member of the Fabian Society. Now, here's what the Fabian Society have to say about Keir Starmer, right? Every single Labour Prime Minister has been a Fabian, and if Labour wins in July, Keir Starmer will join their ranks. This was before the election, of course. Keir was a Fabian before he was elected to Parliament and served on our executive committee. In 2021, he wrote The Road Ahead, a Fabian pamphlet setting out his vision of a fairer, more secure and prosperous Britain built on Labour values. The Fabian Society, let's be perfectly clear, is a communist or a socialist society. It was set up to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, and that was literally their logo for almost 100 years. This society exists solely to slowly and secretly turn the United Kingdom into a full-on socialist state. Starmer has defended and fought in favour, right, of repatriating terrorists who attacked British and American servicemen in Iraq. He actively spent his own time, money and effort protecting terrorists at the expense of British people. He's on record saying that he wants to abolish the monarchy even when he was a King's Counsel. He's decidedly anti-British. But I genuinely don't think that Andy Burnham is anti-British. To be perfectly clear, I don't really have an idea of whether he loves his country, but I do firmly believe that Andy Burnham loves Manchester, and he really does want the best for Manchester. And that actually, for the most part, as mayor, he's done an okay job. Far, far better than someone like Sadiq Khan has done for London. So my fear with Burnham as PM isn't an ideological one, right? It's one just based in realism. The single biggest issue facing the UK right now is the obscene cost of mass immigration, and Burnham as a leftist is and always will be secretly in favour of mass immigration. He will not support removing benefits from immigrants or deporting criminal immigrants or putting British citizens at the top of NHS waiting lists and so on and so forth, right? He is scarily nonchalant about the issues facing us with regards to our national debt, which is, again, a very big leftist cliche. He just seems to think that economics is imaginary and not a real issue, which, I'm assuming is coming from ignorance and not malice, like we see with Starmer. And Burnham also just isn't a human rights lawyer who spent almost his entire career prioritizing the rights of terrorists over British law-abiding citizens. And so, if there's one thing that I could do overnight for the UK to fix the rot, it would be to undo everything that a lawyer has ever done in government in the United Kingdom, because it's always disastrous for British citizens. So I think that actually the news of this coup is good for Britain no matter what, right? Starmer's prospects of destroying our country are diminished a little bit, but a successful coup is still incredibly unlikely. And if Burnham does come out on top, I think, frankly, that's incredibly unlikely, but he'll mostly have little impact and cause no real change, because he'll find out very quickly that the bond markets are right and you have to play to them and you have to just worry about your national debt. And so all these plans you have, you're not going to be able to do them at all. And then at the next election, there's going to be a massive failure to improve the country on behalf of Labour as a whole, which will lead to a massive electoral defeat, which is good for Britain as well. So all in all, I do think the news of this coup is very, very good news for us, and I'm perfectly a little bit ecstatic. And if you really want to help this new channel out, share the video with someone else. Send a link to a group chat or a friend or a family member and help get the word out about what's really going on. and I'll make sure to keep making you videos to keep you on top.